In Fujian province, there was a prominent man named Rongyang who held a position in the imperial court as the emperor's teacher. His ancestors were boat people who made a living by helping people cross the river. Once there was a storm which lasted so long that fierce flooding washed away all the houses. People, animals, and goods were carried downriver by the current. Other boaters took advantage of the situation and strove to collect the floating goods. Only Rongyang's grandfather and great-grandfather took interest in rescuing the drowning people. They did not take any of the goods that floated by. The other boaters all laughed and thought them to be very foolish. Later, when Rongyang's father was born, the Yang family gradually became wealthy. End quote. During Venerable Master Jing Kong's childhood, he lived in Jian'ou for 6 years and often went with schoolmates to play in what had formerly been Rongyang's house. It was of an ancient style, filled with many antiques. There were 2 stone lions on either side of the front door, and lanterns were hung in front, such as were hung in ancient way places. At the time of this account, when there was too much rain, the rivers would flood, causing serious flooding which destroyed houses and washed away belongings. Other boaters took advantage of the situation by collecting the victims' goods in order to make a small fortune. Only Rongyang's grandfather and great-grandfather were the exceptions, as they rescued those who were drowning. They took no interest in any of the passing goods. The other boaters all laughed and thought they were extremely foolish and passing up such a great opportunity to become rich. For they chose instead to save lives. It was only with the birth of Rongyang's father that the family's living conditions improved. Consider how much money they could have made rowing people across the river. Sometimes passengers did not have money to pay the fare, but they would still have to be transported across the river. Therefore, the fee was given at will and depended simply on how much the passenger was able to pay. A small container was placed on one side of the boat, and passengers would place into the container whatever amount they chose to. There was no set rate. This was the accepted practice in Fujian at that time. Students did not even need to pay. From the text. One day, a heavenly person disguised as a Taoist monk came to the Yang family. He told them that their ancestors had accumulated much hidden merit. Consequently, their descendants would enjoy wealth and prominence. He said that there was a special place where they could build their ancestral tomb. So they followed the Taoists' suggestion. Today, it is called the White Hare Grave. End quote. Feng Shui, which is an early practice of placing buildings in a way that will take maximum advantage of the natural qi or energy of the landscape, has its factual basis. However, we need to have good fortune to receive good feng shui. Good or bad, it all depends largely on our good fortune or misfortune. It also depends on our virtues and conditions from our past lifetimes. It has a natural course. If a knowledgeable person shows us a good feng shui spot, this will only enable us to receive what we were supposed to have sooner rather than later. If we do not deserve good feng shui, then we will not be able to benefit from it. In fact, it will actually bring us misfortune. This is because we do not have the good fortune to enjoy it. Therefore, do not be too happy when seeing a good thing coming. Think first whether we are able to bear it. After reading Liao Fan's 4 lessons, we will realize that everything that happens does so for a reason. Indeed, for an ordinary person, one sip, one bite, everything is destined. If we do not acknowledge this fact and do not go about reforming our faults and practicing good deeds, then there will be no variable. Our life will always remain within the constant. Only when we truly understand the way to accumulate goodness and reform faults will we have changing factors and be able to truly change our lives and create destiny. From the text. Shortly after Rongyang was born, he passed the imperial examination when he was only 20 years old, and later received the imperial appointment of master. The emperor even bestowed his grandfather and great-grandfather with the same imperial honors. Today, his many virtuous descendants are still very prominent. End quote. Rongyang was extremely young when he passed the highest imperial examination, the Jinshi level, and attained the highest academic degree at that time. It is equivalent to earning a doctorate degree today. His appointment was extremely high, similar to today's National Affairs Advisor. In other words, he was an advisor to the emperor. Later, he received the rank of imperial teacher. The emperor also conferred the same honors on his grandfather and great-grandfather. In ancient times, it was a great honor to the family's ancestors if an individual became an imperial officer. Although Rongyang's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were ordinary citizens, due to Rongyang's high position, the emperor bestowed upon his ancestors the same honors, although they had already passed away. This was the traditional way to honor ancestors during ancient times in China. Today, we also encourage and reward good deeds. Governments praise and cite good people and their accomplishments. But frankly speaking, the methods used in citing good deeds were a lot more effective in ancient times and had a much deeper educational meaning. Because the descendants of a particular family had contributed to the entire country, it could bestow honor on the individual as well as on the ancestors. Today, the praise or the honors end with the individual and do not extend back to the ancestors. Whereas in ancient times, the emperor could bestow the same honor on the 3 previous generations. We may not see any reason on bestowing an honor upon a person who had died so long ago. What was the point? Actually, there is a very good one, for there is a valuable lesson to be learned from this. It can help us to realize that our achievements are most likely based upon the good deeds of our ancestors. We have been rewarded with the good fortune that stemmed from them. Realizing this, why would there be any reason not to practice good deeds ourselves? If this situation arose when ancestors were in the 6 realms, then they could still obtain an honor bestowed upon them by the emperor, regardless of which realm they were in. If they were in the hungry ghost realm, then all the kings of ghosts would respect them. If they were kind, they would gain the respect of heavenly beings and spirits. This is why it is such a valuable lesson. It can provide a wonderful incentive which can encourage people to practice acts of goodness. Therefore, the true merits and virtues from this lesson are inconceivable. Mr. Liao Feng wrote how Rongyang's descendants were still prominent during his time. This happened because so many generations had accumulated goodness, had built a solid foundation. They held official positions for generations. Thus, these descendants also had virtue and remained very prestigious and prosperous. From the text. Zi Changyang, from the county of Ying, in Zhejiang province is another example. Zicheng worked as a member of the staff of the county courthouse. He was a kind, humane, and law-abiding man. Once, the county magistrate punished a criminal by beating him until his blood spilled out onto the ground. The magistrate's anger did not subside, and he was about to continue. Zicheng knelt and pleaded with him to stop beating the prisoner. The magistrate said, "It is all right for you to plead, but how can I not be angry when this person has broken the law?" Zicheng replied that when those in a position of leadership in the government do not follow the proper path, ordinary people would lose their way. Once we realize this, we should feel sorrow rather than joy. And if we should not feel joy, then how can we feel anger? Thus, a case like this called for more understanding. The magistrate was touched by Zicheng's speech and ceased the beating. End quote. Zicheng Yang had a job in the county courthouse, which is similar to today's section chief. It was not a very high-ranking position. He had a kind heart. He was honest, impartial, and law-abiding. At the time of this incident, the county magistrate handled judicial matters, and he was also the judge. When the criminal refused to tell the truth and even spoke back, the magistrate became furious. He beat the criminal severely until his blood fell on the ground, but even then the magistrate remained infuriated. When Zicheng saw this, he felt compassion for the prisoner and pleaded with the magistrate to stop. Zicheng knelt in front of the magistrate and pleaded on behalf of the prisoner. This took a great deal of courage, because what he said was a direct accusation of the hierarchy. If the superior officer had not agreed and blamed him for being so blunt, Zicheng would have gotten himself into a great deal of trouble. However, if the superior officer was virtuous, moral, and wise, he would not become angry. He would have realized that his staff was only reminding him to be rational. Zicheng spoke of those in high government positions. He was talking about the provincial and city magistrates. He said these officials did not follow the proper path, which means that the government did not do a good job in political education. What is the path? It is the 3 guidelines for a ruler to follow, to act as leader, parent, teacher. When a district government official who presided over the local administrations did not fulfill the duties similar to those of a parent or a teacher, then he did not properly look after his people. When a citizen had committed an offense, it was because the ruler did not teach them well. This is why Zi Cheng said that when those in a position of leadership in the government did not follow the proper path, ordinary people would lose their way because they had no guidelines to follow and no one to turn to for advice. If the administration behaved properly, then the people would have set principles to comply with. During the Han Dynasty, approximately 2100 years ago, the philosophies of hundreds of scholars were replaced by those of Confucius and Mencius. Confucianism was used as the basis for the educational system. Before this time, during the spring-autumn period, there were many philosophers and scholars teaching so many different things that it was difficult for the people to know which one to follow. In numerous volumes of books written by hundreds of scholars, each one had its distinct point of view and had its own theories. Upon a rough examination, each seemed to make sense. However, with so many selections, people were at a loss as to which one to choose. This was why it was imperative to choose one as the model. The teachings of whoever was chosen had to be widely accepted by those with different cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Once this model had been accepted, then the works of other scholars could be used as supplementary references. In China, the main moral standards derived from the philosophies of Confucius and Mencius. The system was used from the Han Dynasty up until the time of the Qing Dynasty. It naturally became the basis of the teachings for the Chinese people. Confucius and Mencius taught us the 5 human relationships and the 10 moral responsibilities. These are the fundamental principles for people to follow. They are the proper path. The 5 human relationships concentrate on relations among people. They start with the basic relations between a married couple within their own bedroom. The husband should fulfill his responsibilities pertaining to his role as a husband, and the wife was to do likewise. Those responsibilities are a form of obligation. Each person must fulfill his or her obligations. A harmonious couple is the basis of all prosperous families. Outside of the bedroom is the larger family. There are the parents over us, children under us, and brothers and sisters around us. each holds a different role with different responsibilities, which we need to fulfill. These duties are innate. They are not assigned by another, nor are they the ideas of a particular person. They are moral principles. They are the proper path. Beyond the family are society and the country. At the top is the leader of the country. Below the leader are government officials. On the same level with us are our friends. The 5 human relationships refer to husband and wife, parent and child, siblings, friends, and political leaders in the public. To expand into a broader view, everyone in this world is like a sibling to everyone else. Therefore, the 5 relationships among people are the unification of a country. In this way, the entire country is like a big family. This is the proper path. In the minds of ancient sages and virtuous people, those in politics would be considered as great people, and so they were addressed as such. They had the responsibility to educate the people, nurture and lead them in proper behavior by establishing moral guidelines. As long as people followed these guidelines, there would be no wrongdoings. In addition to these guidelines, they were to teach people moral values such as loyalty, filial piety, humility, faith, and peace. The basic educational goal in Confucianism is to block materialism, attain awakening, have a sincere mind and a virtuous heart, discipline ourselves, have a harmonious family, rule a country, and foster peace. Today, schools do not teach these anymore. Emphasis is now placed on technology rather than on humanity. The latter teach us that when we see the misdeeds of others, we would do well to take a hard look at ourselves and see if we have fulfilled our own duties. Zicheng told the county magistrate that when we realize people might do wrong because those in leadership did not show the proper way, we should feel sorrow rather than joy. In other words, once we know the motive behind the offense, we should feel compassion for the offender rather than joy at having solved the case. Why should we not feel joy? Because we have yet to fulfill our own responsibilities. And if we should not feel joy, then we should certainly not feel anger. Fortunately for Zicheng, in ancient times, in order for a person to hold a government position such as county magistrate. He would have to pass an imperial examination. In other words, he would be well educated. Therefore, the magistrate immediately recognized his error when Zicheng reminded him of it. It was extremely brave for Zicheng to speak up on behalf of the prisoner. The magistrate immediately recognized this and ceased to be angry. From this example, we can see that Mr. Yang had considerable wisdom, virtue, and insight. Thus, it was good for him to accumulate virtue and merits in the court, because he could do many good deeds. From the text. Although Zicheng came from a very poor family, he never took any bribes. If the prisoners were short of food, he would always take food from his own home, even if it meant going hungry himself. One day, several new prisoners needed feeding. Zicheng's home was short of food. If he gave them what he had, his family would go hungry. But if he kept the food for his family, then the prisoners would go hungry. He felt that the prisoners needed the food more than his family did. A deplorable situation. He discussed it with his wife, who asked where the prisoners came from. Zicheng answered that they were from Hangzhou. They had to tolerate hunger along the way, and their faces had become sallow. End quote. Zicheng's family were very poor. At that time, government officials received a very small salary, and a lot of them retired with hardly any savings. If an official retired with a lot of money, then it was most likely that he had taken bribes or embezzled money during his office. Where else could the money have come from? In ancient times, scholars did not learn how to run a business. If a scholar became a high-ranking official and contributed great services to the country, then he would in return receive rewards in the form of farmlands and houses. So it was possible to become wealthy in this way. However, if he just held an average position, then his salary would be quite meager. Zicheng only held a very low rank in the county government. Regardless of this, he refused any gifts that were offered to him. Sometimes, relatives of the prisoners would offer him bribes in return for a lighter sentence or for better care in the prison. It was inevitable that he would receive such offers. However, he never accepted any of them and always acted justly and fairly in all circumstances. It was difficult to be honest in such a tempting environment. Also, at this time, the amount of food provided for the prisoners was very meager. Often, the prisoners were moved over a very long distance. When they did so, they often went without any food. Zicheng always did his best to try to help them. It was quite a distance from Hangzhou to Ningpo. The prisoners had to walk with shackles, so their traveling time was considerably slower than usual. At the maximum, they could cover maybe 50 or 60 kilometers. This means they would have had to spend several days on the road. Zicheng felt great compassion for these prisoners who went without food for all those days. If he gave his small amount of rice to the prisoners, then his family would go hungry. If he gave the rice to his family, then the prisoners would go hungry. So after discussing the situation with his wife, they came to a solution. They would take what little rice they had, make a rice porridge, and give half of it to the prisoners. From the text. This practice of compassion never ceased, and eventually Zicheng had 2 sons. The elder son's name was Shou Chen, and the younger one was named Shou Zhi. Both sons became very prominent and held important government positions. His eldest grandson became vice minister of the Ministry of Justice. His second grandson was a member of the government staff in Sichuan province. They were both prominent. Today, the government official, Chu Tingyang, who is known for his virtuous deeds, is also their descendant. End quote. The 2 sons received the good fortune which was accumulated by their parents. The government office they worked in would be equivalent to today's Ministry of the Interior. There were only 6 ministries at that time. Zicheng's 2 sons were both in what was then called the Department of Civil Personnel. Their rank would be similar to a vice minister. Usually there was 1 minister and 2 vice ministers. One handled administrative matters and the other handled general matters. The eldest son was a vice minister in the Ministry of Justice. The second eldest grandson was on the administrative staff, which was 1 rank lower than the governor. He supervised each county's magistrate and oversaw approximately 8 to 12 counties. Both grandsons were known for doing a good job. A current descendant, Mr. Qing Tu-yang, also held a government position and was known for his honesty and fairness. This proves that the goodness accumulated by this couple benefited the following generations. From the text. Here is another true example that happened during the Zhongtang period, during the time of Emperor Yingzong. Once, a group of thieves appeared in Fujian province. Many intellectuals joined them. The emperor appointed imperial censor General Zhang to go south and subdue them. The general tricked the thieves and captured their thief. Later, official Zhang dispatched General Xie to subdue the remaining thieves in eastern Fujian province. General Xie managed to attain a list of those who belonged to the organization and commanded that a white flag be secretly given to those who did not belong with the thieves. They were told to place the flag on their door when the imperial army came to town, and the soldiers were ordered not to harm the innocent. With this one thought of goodness, General Xie saved tens of thousands of people from being killed. Later, his son Qianxie achieved first place in the imperial examinations and later became an advisor to the emperor. His grandson Pei Xie also placed third in the imperial examinations. End quote. This happened over 500 years ago. The thieves were actually a revolutionary army preparing to revolt. The position General Xie had was similar to the current director of the Department of Finance and Civil Rights. This paragraph talks about the effects of preventing unnecessary killing. When we look back in Chinese history, we see very few descendants of famous generals who had good fortune. Why? They caused too many deaths. They made too many enemies. There are probably less than 10 generals in all of Chinese history who have descendants who received good fortune. And General Xie was one of those few. Another prime example of the law of cause and effect is the famous general Ziyi Guo, who lived during the Tang Dynasty, approximately 1300 years ago. He had outstanding descendants because he accumulated goodness and virtues. During the Song Dynasty, approximately 1,000 years ago, there were two generals under the leadership of Emperor Zhao Guangying, Bin Cao and Han Cao. The descendants of Han Cao had very little good fortune, which did not even last 3 generations. The daughters became prostitutes, and many family members became destitute. Bin Cao, on the other hand, was a very benevolent general. He did not kill any innocent people, and his descendants were all quite prosperous. So, if the general did not have firm rules for his troops not to harass the civilians, then the burden of blame would be on his shoulders. So in this example, we talked about the consequences of unnecessary killings. General Xie was smart. He taught his troops how to distinguish the robbers from the civilians. In this way, he would not mistakenly cause the death of any innocent people. The prestige and prosperity of his descendants proved that there is no escaping the law of cause and effect. From the text. Another example is the Lin family from Putian in Fujian province. Among their ancestors was an elderly lady who was very generous. Every day she made rice balls to give to the poor and always gave as many as they asked for. There was an immortal disguised as a Taoist monk who came every day for 3 years and each day would ask for 6 or 7 rice balls. She always granted his request and never expressed any displeasure. The Taoist monk then realized her deep sincerity. End quote. This is another example of an ancestor who accumulated good fortune for her descendants. She made some rice balls every day to distribute to the poor. She treated everyone the same and gave the rice balls to whoever asked for them. It is easy to be good occasionally, but to be continuously generous is very difficult. She was tireless in this good deed. A heavenly being who disguised himself as a Taoist monk requested 6 or 7 rice balls every day for 3 years. He knew that the old lady was indeed sincere in the good deeds that she did. Sincerity is an accumulation of virtues, and giving is an accumulation of goodness. She had no other wish than to help those who were poor. From the text. He said to her, I have eaten your rice balls for 3 years with nothing to show my gratitude in return. Perhaps I can help you in this way. On the land behind your house, there is a good place for you to place your grave. If you are placed there in the future, the number of your descendants who will have imperial appointments will be equivalent to the number of seeds in a pound of sesame seeds. End quote. Having some knowledge of feng shui, the Taoist monk suggested to her a good place for her grave. If her advice were followed, then her descendants would receive an unimaginable number of imperial appointments. Imagine how many sesame seeds there are in a pound of seeds. That was the number of her descendants who would benefit from her acts of goodness. When she passed away, the Lin family followed the heavenly being's suggestion and placed her at the designated spot. From the text. The first generation after that, 9 men passed the imperial examination, and it continued that way for every succeeding generation. There was a saying in Fujian that the results of the imperial appointments always had the surname Lin on it. End quote. Even in just the first generation, after the elderly lady had passed away, 9 of her descendants passed the imperial examinations. This was because of the good fortune she had accumulated from her good deeds. Not only did she have many descendants, but they were prosperous as well. The Lin family in Fujian province was the largest family and was very prosperous. This is the effect from the cause of sincerely giving away food to those who are poor. From the text. Another example comes from the father of an imperial historian whose name was Zhou Anfeng. One winter, many years ago, Zhou Anfeng's father was on his way to school when he encountered a person lying frozen in the snow. Finding the man still breathing, he quickly took off his coat to wrap around the frozen man. He carried him back home and revived him. End quote. This example tells of the good fortune accumulated by saving someone's life. Zhou Anfeng held his official duties in what was then the National Academy. When his father was himself a young scholar and was on his way to school one morning, he saw a person along the roadside lying frozen in the snow. We can only imagine that the person must have been very poor and ill to have fallen into such a state. His father touched the poor man and realized that the man was on the verge of death. He immediately took off his own coat to wrap around the man, carried him home, and nursed him back to health. From the text. That night, Zhou An's father dreamt of a heavenly being telling him, "You helped a dying man out of utter sincerity. This is a great virtue. I will bring the famous general Qi Han of the Han dynasty, of the Song dynasty, to be reborn as your son." Later, Zhou An was born and was named Qi. End quote. When we see a person in dire circumstances, no matter who they may be, as long as we try to save his or her life, it will be considered a great act of kindness. Qi Han was a very famous general during the Song dynasty. He was greatly admired by the emperor, who bestowed a noble honor to his title. General Qi Han was highly regarded in Chinese history. So the heavenly being arranged for Qi Han to be reborn into the Feng family. It was all because Zhuo An's father had saved someone's life that he was rewarded in turn with a good son. This also exemplifies that reincarnation within the 6 realms is factual. The ancient Chinese all deeply believed in it. We need to generate our shameful heart, fearful heart, courageous, determined heart. For they are the inner, direct cause and condition in reforming. But we still need catalytic factors, that is, good friends on the path to awakening, to remind us, to help us from the outside, to be our visible assisting factors. If we ourselves have one virtuous thought, one sincere thought of trying to correct our faults, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas will help us, and all benevolent spirits will praise and respect us. Thus, without our even being aware of it, they will help us. So even just one virtuous thought can result in inconceivable results. Therefore, we need to truly change through actions, for in this way, cause and condition are complete. Once we begin to change, we will begin to see results, such as being happy when in the past we were depressed or unhappy. If we had many worries, they will be lifted from our minds after we reach understanding, and instead we will become liberated and free. If we were confused, we will become intelligent. We will no longer be foolish. When we find ourselves in circumstances that are disturbing or agitating, or when we encounter many diverse and hard to solve matters, we will easily be able to resolve them, even as others seem overwhelmed by them. We have seen examples of this in other practitioners. Some are able to solve matters without any apparent difficulty, while others find it extremely difficult to resolve them. Once we begin to change and see results, we will usually come up against karmic obstacles. We may feel confused and overwhelmed, lacking energy and spirit. We may become forgetful and feel worried much of the time, even when there is nothing to worry about. We may become irritable for no reason at all. We may be met with the irritability of others when we try to treat them kindly. We may have nightmares where everything is incoherent and upside down. If we have any of these signs, we need to regret earnestly to rid ourselves of our bad habits. We no longer have the time to procrastinate, to be careless, to be foolish. If we do not reform, then for us there will be no future. We will have wasted this entire lifetime. We do not know when we will again encounter a good teacher, but we know that we have now encountered one. We do not know what our next life will be, but we do know that we will have forgotten everything we have learned of Buddhism. We do not know when we will again be born in the human realm, but we do know the odds are that we will be born into one of the three lower realms. We do not know when we will again hear the teachings of Buddhism, but we do know that Maitreya Bodhisattva, the next Buddha in our world, will not be born for several billions of years. We need to transcend reincarnation in this lifetime. As we encounter karmic obstacles, we need to immediately correct our faults, to stay on the true path, to not waste this valuable lifetime. Only in this way will we truly give up thoughts of ourselves, of benefiting ourselves, of controlling, of dominating others. Only in this way will we truly rid ourselves of bad habits and faults and be able to accept the teachings, cultivate good deeds, and accumulate merits. And only in this way will we be able to truly change our lives, our destiny, to help all sentient beings throughout the three times of the past, present, and future, throughout the entire universe. Amitabha. Thank you.